India is moving towards its commitment to lead the global action against climate crisis. And this year's budget defines India's firm stance on green growth with a special focus on net zero and sustainable development. Companies like StepChange, based out of Bangalore, are helping businesses identify and accelerate their path to net zero emissions. To discuss this in detail, we're in conversation with Ankit Jain, who's the CEO and founder of StepChange. Thank you so much, Ankit, for taking out time and speaking to me.
Thank you, Navya, for having me here today. Thank you.
Ankit, StepChange is a climate decision-making tool company, as you call it. And I want to know, can you help us understand what exactly is StepChange doing and how is it that the company is helping businesses track and reduce their carbon footprint?
Sure. So first of all, what we mean by climate decision-making is that as the entire economy moves towards net zero, and it's obvious that we need to move towards net zero, India set a goal, every large economy in the world has set it. Right? Once the economy set a goal, the large institutions, financial institutions, enterprises start setting net zero goals. The moment you've set a net zero goal, you're expected to show year-on-year reduction. But as a responsible company, you can't be increasing emissions today. Right? Of course. Once you start reducing emissions, the obvious question is, from where does that reduction come from? A lot of your emissions actually sit in day-to-day decisions that you take.
Right.
Your employees take, your managers take, there's deciding between vendors, choosing what ingredients to build into your product, what packaging to use, right? As a financial institution, who to give a loan to, not give a loan to. These are all decisions that you take as a company. Right. So how do you start taking these decisions with the environment in mind? We are helping them move towards net zero because we are helping them reduce emissions, not just top down, but bottoms up.
Ankit, the Indian government has increased focus on environmental, social, and governance, as we call it, ESG. Can you explain what is ESG for the benefit of our viewers, and why do you think it is required, and why do you think it is coming up as this core business strategy in India?
See, first of all, ESG is this sort of big umbrella term that started honestly out of the financial services market. Which are three very different concepts got clubbed together because these are three things that investors care about beyond financial performance. Right? Let me start with G, right? Companies, especially public companies, need good governance. That's just known. And because they have to be run well, right? You should have the right policies in place, right trainings for board members, for management, for employees, right incentives in the company, right checks and balances. This is just essentially good hygiene of how you should run a company. That's basically what forms G of ESG. Right?
Okay.
Ideally, you also want companies to take care of social metrics like better diversity, better accessibility, human rights, thinking about what's happening in your supply chain, ensuring that you're mapping and communicating all of these things to your relevant stakeholders, right? That's the S part of ESG, right? Your social responsibility in some sense.
Right.
And finally, companies increasingly, or investors increasingly want companies to do well for the environment, right? Because over the last few years, or a decade, I would say, we've seen that climate change is becoming very real. Like we're starting to feel the consequences. So in order for our companies, especially our largest corporations, to align with what we would want as a society, there's push from investors, regulators, for companies to start doing good for the environment, right? Take steps to reduce their carbon emissions, their air quality impact, water use, better waste management, right? And also the reverse, which is for companies to better understand the risk climate has on their operations.
Right.
And how will their operations need to adapt to the changing climate? So these are three different concepts, but get clubbed together as ESG, and each of them have a slightly different impact on companies' strategy. You can think about ESG almost like a report card,
right?
Which helps you, where you are on these very different things. But sustainability, which is the term I prefer a little bit more than ESG, to be honest, it's the process rather than the outcome, right? So to be a sustainable company, you need to make it part of your core culture. So sustainability essentially helps you do better on your ESG metrics.
There's this term carbon accounting that is doing the rounds a lot, and people don't really understand what that means. Can you explain what carbon accounting means, and what is it that companies should keep in mind while they're focusing on carbon accounting?
So what carbon accounting essentially means is very simply, it's a way of measuring your environmental impact. As on climate specifically. So this doesn't include water, waste, etc.
Right.
as measured in carbon emissions or carbon dioxide emissions, right? So there are multiple greenhouse gases, right? Each has a different environmental impact on global warming, but each of them is converted to what is called CO2 equivalent. Now, there is a standard global way of doing carbon accounting, just like there are certain standard ways of doing financial accounting, right? There's the US GAAP, there is different ways of doing financial accounting. Climate accounting is done by is done under the methodology called the GHG protocol. That protocol defines three broad categories of emissions. The first one is called Scope 1 emissions. Scope 1 emissions are emissions that happen within the operational boundary of your company. Right? Okay. So you use diesel to run a generator. That's emissions that are literally coming out within your factory. Right? If you're using an air conditioner, the air conditioner leaks, CFCs or fugitive emissions, that's directly coming. That's Scope 1. Okay. Scope 2 is often electricity that we consume, which immediately at the same time in a thermal power plant at some distance is releasing emissions into the environment. Right? That's Scope 2. Scope 3 is the beast. Right? Scope 3 is everything else. Yeah. Scope 3 includes your entire supply chain. It includes your business travel, your employees commuting, your upstream and downstream transportations. It includes the waste generated in your business. It includes even the use of your products. If you build a product that uses energy, it also includes that. It also includes how your products have end of life. Yeah. Right. Your franchise. So it has 15 categories and it's fairly comprehensive and detailed, right? So Scope 3 ends up being the harder part of carbon accounting. But that's broadly what carbon accounting is.
So can we say, with what you're suggesting, can we say that Scope 3 is difficult to understand and then sort of take action?
Yes. So it is definitely more difficult to understand, to measure, and to take action. Yeah. But at the same time, for most companies, Scope 3 is 70-80% of their emissions. Yeah. Right. You cannot ignore Scope 3. Yeah. It has to be measured, it has to be reduced. And that's the only way, in fact, you move from large corporations to rest of the economy. Right? Because SMEs are often part of supply chains of large corporations. Right. So only if your customer is going to start asking for more environmentally friendly products and practices, would you as an SME start thinking about that? Right? So hence Scope 3 is increasingly important for the larger corporations to think about.
Also, Ankit, net zero is crucial for a country like India, but how do you think Indian companies and businesses are faring on this path to achieving net zero?
Let me first describe a journey for a company in this space, and then I'll talk about where the Indian companies are. Sure. So the first step, of course, is just baselining. Right? Okay. And honestly, the first step for most companies is finding people who understand this. Yeah. Because finding talent in this is quite hard. But once you do that, you need to start understanding what type of data do you have in your organization, what are the appropriate boundaries, what categories of Scope 3 do you want to measure, what you not want to measure. Then you get into what could be a strategic exercise. Right? You ask yourself, why is this important to me? Right. Is it important because of my brand? I want to be known as a sustainable company. Is this because help me get more market share? Does it help lower my cost of capital? Is it purely for compliance? Is it because my competitors are doing it? Right? If you know why you're doing it, you'll know what you need to do. Yeah. So you start with that. And then you come up with a strategy which says, okay, do I lead in this space? Do I fast follow? Do I just learn from others and quickly keep following? Or do I take a counter view to the market? Yeah. Like, do I say, okay, if market is thinking EVs are going to sell, I'm going to bet on CNG vehicles. Right? And that's fair. That's the call that you are taking, right? And once you've started thinking about all of this, is then when you put a net zero target, right? Or at least you start thinking about, is it feasible for me to get there by 2030, by 2040, 50, 60, 70, right? Now, for example, in India, if you're a bank and you're thinking a net zero target, it's very hard to do it before 2070, because if India is only going to get there by 2070, and you're lending to almost all sectors in the Indian economy, how do you get there before 2070? Yeah. Right? Yeah. But if you're a services company, right, which has more control, then you can afford to do it much sooner. So you have to be upfront about how you're going to deal with that. How do you think about who should own this? Is it a board responsibility? Is it a CEO responsibility? Do you create an ESG committee? Do you hire an ESG head? Is it everyone's responsibility or someone's responsibility, right? Again, different choices with different consequences, right? And And how much do you start reporting? What impact does it have on your product roadmap, on your clients? So all of that is part of this sort of strategic exercise which you do as a next step. Right?
Right.
Post that, you really start focusing on thorough measurement and reduction. Right? So you make sure you build data systems to measure all your scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. You start focusing on reduction efforts within your own operations first, and then continue to supply chain and other parts of your businesses.
Right.
You start figuring out how to align economic incentives with ESG incentives. Most of Indian companies, right, and I'm talking within the large corporations, the top 1,000 companies, would clearly be in baselining phase. Right? They're still finding trained professionals. They're starting to just measure their emissions for the first time. Most of them have not published clear ESG strategies. There is a set of companies between, I would say, 100 to 200, which have already been doing this type of reporting for other reasons, which are broadly in the second and third phase, right? They have clear strategy in place already and are now focusing on driving reduction.
I also want to understand, what is your idea of a green economy, and how do you think it is going to benefit young entrepreneurs and companies in a country like India?
A green economy is an economy that's a lot more in harmony with the environment than what economies we have today, right? Essentially meaning it leaves a very low footprint on the environment, right? All the activities that happen. It means developing technologies that have a low ecological footprint. And to me, this is not just carbon, but also air quality, water, waste, use of resources. How do you think about your biological biodiversity? Right? And starting to change behavior and habits, right? A lot of us as individuals, as corporations, as employees of those corporations, will have to change the way we do things. Like, does everyone need to come to office? Even after COVID has shown us that it's perfectly okay to work from home. Right? That has a significant impact on our footprint. Right? Do we need to fly to every meeting with customers, or can we start doing most of them over Zoom? Right? These are the type of behavior changes we'll have to also start thinking about, right? And then at an industrial level, right, at a core sort of, when you build chemicals, you build cement, you build iron and steel, you do power. In those things, we'll have to think about how to move away from fossil fuels, which will be really about technology innovation, right? Just like solar is now starting to replace thermal, similarly for all other emitting sectors in the economy, we'll have to find technologically sound and effective solutions.
On one hand, we're talking about harmony with the environment, which is true, but also on the other hand, can we understand what are the economic opportunities if a company or a business is moving towards a greener economy?
Yes, absolutely. Now, but just to start with an example, right? Look at the value creation that has happened in the electric vehicle space.
Yes.
Right. Tesla today is one of the most valuable companies. Its owner, its founder is one of the richest people, right? And this is less than 5% of cars sold globally are electric vehicles, right? That's the nature of disruption that we're talking about, right? Because there's, of course, value reduction for companies that are not doing electric vehicles. And that's going to happen in almost every sector of the economy, right? Every sector in the economy today has significant emissions in it. A lot of construction has high emissions. Things like cement manufacturing, iron and steel manufacturing, fertilizer manufacturing, textile manufacturing, all of these will have to go through fundamental disruption and figure out how to make products with near zero impact on the environment. I think the entire economy will get retooled to become net zero, and each of those sectors will see this type of a disruption.
Ankit, we say that this decade in particular is the decade of climate action, and there are a lot of young entrepreneurs and startups doing their bit to fight climate crisis. Do you have a piece of advice for them?
I think, my advice would generally be, take an area that you really understand well.
Okay.
Right? Could be someone today working in the construction space.
Okay.
Figure out how to take the construction industry towards net zero. Right? Instead of trying to come up with completely novel solutions in different parts of the industry that you don't understand, your best bet of being successful is to take something you deeply understand and find ways of doing business in a way that has a very low environmental impact, very low carbon emissions. Right? So, that would be my simple advice to most folks who are looking to make a dent in this space.
That sounds interesting. I'd again like to thank you so much, Ankit, for taking out time and speaking to me.
Thank you. Thank you.